Welcome to episode 5 of the Python Basics series. In this video, we're going to go over how to perform repetitive tasks repeatedly by making use of loops. So the reason why we need loops is so that we can automate repetitive tasks. There are many cases where we have to do the same action several different times. However, currently, with our knowledge right now, we have to do it a certain number of times by just copy and pasting the code, which really isn't too convenient. Say you have 1,000 email addresses that you have to send to different people. If you were to do it manually, it would take a really long time. However, with the loop, we can just iterate through each of the recipients and just send the email to each of them. The power of loops is that they enable us to repeat a specific action many times, not just once. So the first type of loop that we're going to be looking at is a for loop. So for loops allow us to iterate through each item in a collection like a list or dictionary. So here's some example syntax with a list. So you can see the creation of the list at the top, and then below that, you can see the for loop. So firstly, it starts with the keyword for, and then a name item, which we can use to refer to every single item in the list. And then in my list tells Python that we're taking each item from my list, and then a colon, and then an indented block of code which contains code to handle each specific item. Let's go back to this student names example from the previous video. So here we have a list of student names, and so here we want to print out each of the students' names individually. So in order to do that, we can make use of a for loop. So we can type in for, and then after for comes the loop variable that refers to each of the students' names that we iterate over. So I'm just going to say name for this, and then we're iterating over the student names list. So we're saying in student names. For a different array, it would just be in and then the name of the list. And now we want to print out each of the names, so we can print just the name. And then if we run the Python code, you can see each name is being printed out individually. So this might not seem very useful because you can just print out the student's name list like this, but this becomes very useful when you want to do more than just list each of the students' names. Maybe, for example, you want to greet each student, in which case you can create a string saying, hello, how are you doing? And then we can use the plus sign to add these strings or concatenate these strings together, and then add a question mark at the end. So now if we run it, you can see that it greets every student in the class and asks them, how are you doing? Now that we know how to iterate through a list or collection, let's learn how to iterate through a sequence of numbers next. So in order to create the sequence of numbers, we can make use of the range function. The range function takes 3 arguments: minimum, maximum, and step size. This creates a collection of numbers that goes from the minimum value up to, but not including the maximum value, with a step size of whatever you provide. If you don't provide a step size, then it just defaults to 1, which is the default step size. And the default minimum value that will be applied if you don't provide it will be 0. So for example, if you put just the number 5 in the range function, then it'll start from 0 and keep adding 1 until it reaches 5, but it won't include 5. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. However, range of 1 through 6 gives 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Again, it doesn't include 6, but it starts at 1 because that's the minimum value that we provide. And also, range of 10, 17, 3, minimum value of 10, maximum of 17, step size of 3. So it goes 10, then 13, then 16, then 19, but don't include 19 because 17 is now exceeded. Because the range function makes it really convenient to create a collection that represents an arithmetic sequence of numbers, then we can use it for two use cases. We can either use it to repeat an action a specific number of times by putting that number of times we want a code to run inside the range function, like in the first block of code. And we can also iterate through an arithmetic sequence that we create using the range function, as shown in the second code snippet. So let's say we wanted to just say the word hello 5 times. In order to do that, we could say for I, that's our loop variable in this case, and then in, and then we use the range function, and we're going to be running it 5 times, so we just put 5. And then inside the loop body, we can print out hello. And then you can see it prints out hello 5 times. And we can also just print out I, the loop variable, to see which numbers are being iterated through. So you can see it goes from 0 to 5, but it doesn't include 5. So you can even see this with larger numbers too, like 10. It goes from 0 to 10, but 10 is excluded. We can also create an arithmetic sequence with the other parameters of the range function. So let's say I wanted to go from 18 to 30 with a step size of 5. Then you can see 18 and then 23, that's 18 plus 5, and then 28, which is 23 plus 5, and then the next number would be 33, but it exceeds 30, so it's not printed out. And so this shows how the range function can be used to easily generate sequences of numbers, and also easily repeat code a specific number of times. Now that we know how for loops work, let's look at the other type of loop in Python, the while loop. So unlike for loops, which just iterate over a collection, while loops repeat an action as long as a condition is true. So it's basically an if statement, but endlessly repeated until the condition finally returns false. So here you can see I've created an example piece of code to showcase while loops. So here we have a points variable that's initially set to 0, and then you can see this loop is running while the points value is less than 5. So while it's less than 5, 1 repeatedly gets added to it. This is so that the points variable keeps incrementing until it eventually reaches 5 and exits the loop. And then it just prints the points for each iteration of the loop. So if we were to run the code, you can see firstly, point starts at 0, so 1 gets added to it, so it's 1, then 1's printed out, and then 1 is less than 5, and then 1 is added to 1, so points equals 2 now, and then 2 gets printed out, and so on, until points reaches 5, in which case the loop will end, because the condition is now false. However, what if the condition never ends up becoming false? Well, we can simulate that by getting rid of this line that's incrementing points here. And so if we run the code now, you can see 0 endlessly prints. This is because it's stuck in an infinite loop, because the points variable is never changing, so this condition never changes, meaning it's always stuck at true, and the while loop is printing out 0 forever. So it's important to always have some code inside the while loop that will eventually make the condition false to ensure that your program doesn't run infinitely and that memory doesn't leak, or your operating system doesn't crash eventually. The final concept we'll be going over in this video are the break and continue keywords. Firstly, break stops the loop immediately. As soon as the code reaches the break keyword, the loop gets exited out of, and the loop ends prematurely. However, continue doesn't exit out of the loop, it just ends the current iteration and moves on to the next one early. So let's go back to this while loop example to show break and continue in action. So firstly, I'm going to increase this from 5 points to 10 so that it's more visible, the effects of the break and continue keywords. And so let's say I wanted to break out of the loop when the points reaches 5. So I can do that here if I wanted to. So I could create an if statement saying if points is equal to 5, then break. So exit out of the loop. And then if I were to run the code, you can see it gets to 1, 2, 3, and 4, but once it reaches 5, then it's incremented, but because the points are equal to 5, it breaks, it exits out of the loop before it can print out 5. However, if I were to say continue here instead of break, then when we run the Python code, you can see that it goes through 1, 2, 3, 4, but 5 is skipped. This is because when points reaches 5, it goes to here, and then it reaches the continue statement, which makes this loop reiterate. And then the points moves up to 6, and then the loop continues from there. So continue is a good way of skipping iterations, while using the break keyword is good for when you want to just completely exit out of the loop. So both are really useful for controlling the behavior of a loop. As a challenge to conclude this episode, create a fake countdown timer for a new rocket launch. So in this exercise, you're going to need to use a loop to print every number from 10 to 1, counting down. And after the number reaches 0, print out blast off to announce that the rocket is officially being launched. The expected output is shown in yellow on the screen. This concludes episode 5 of the Python Basics series. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and make sure to look out for episode 6, which will be the final episode of the series.